Sisters, working class heroes, this is The Rick Smith Show. Thanks so much for being here today on the big program. Lots to get to, lots to talk about. Actually thought about taking the day off and playing a rerun from 2016 because, to steal a line from Yogi Berra, it's like deja vu all over again. Everything that we're seeing out of the Trump camp, same bag of tricks from 2016. The emails are back. Some questionable sources on how the emails were obtained. This time, the better part is they didn't even wait for someone like WikiLeaks to drop it. Rudy did it. And you got to wonder, Rudy, dude, what's going on between the ears? How far hath thou fallen? That you got yourself in the middle of this. Very, very bizarre. And again, like I said, it's like deja vu all over again. Today you had FBI Director Christopher Wray coming out and saying that the U.S. is going to impose costs on any foreign nation that interferes with our election. There will be consequences. And I'm going, we're 13 days from the election. You know when to talk about this was? 4 years ago. You know when to talk about this was? 3.5 years ago. You know when we should have been talking about this? 3 years ago. We should have been talking about this. And I said this on Inauguration Day. I could have saved Trump all of the headaches that he went through, all of the impeachment, I could have saved all of that by Trump just coming out and, wait for it, being honest. I know. It's a bar that is too high, and I do expect a bit too much. But like I said on Inauguration Day, had he come out and said, look, the Russians were fiddling around. I don't know whether it had any possible sway of the outcome of the election. I don't know if it helped or hurt me, but I am going to make sure that it never happens again. And I am going to put together a blue ribbon panel and a commission, and I'm going to put the smartest people possible into place so that we make sure that we never have any foreign nation ever interfere in our sacred elections. We are going to protect the sanctity of the ballot box so that there is never a question again on whether we can trust the outcome of our elections. There should have been a commission. There should have been a push for a new Voting Rights Act for the 21st century. We could have been doing all kinds of stuff to secure our elections, but we didn't. Why? Because clearly Republicans don't want everyone to vote. Clearly they've read the numbers as I have. They've seen the demographics as we've all seen. They know their days are numbered. They know their ideology. They know their membership. They know everything is, wrong. And they're going to hold on to power any way they can. And if that means lie, cheat, steal, then lie, cheat, steal is what we shall do. Which is why I said I could have taken the day off and just replayed one of the shows in the days leading up to the 2016 election because we're hitting on the same kind of themes. The difference this time is that Trump has a record to run on, and a bad one. And for me, the biggest bad part of the record is he did nothing to hold Russia to account. In fact, he made things worse by pandering, by looking very weak on the international stage with Russia. And I know he says, nobody's been tougher than Russia on me. Reality, I don't know if you saw the Helsinki press conference. Really? Tough? Not so much. And here we are. You've got the FBI director saying, yep, there can be costs. And you also have the director of national intelligence, John Ratcliffe, just minutes ago, saying that Iran now, we've now thrown Iran into this, but Iran and Russia, they're going to interfere in our elections. They're interfering because evidently we found out that, if you remember yesterday, we talked about the Proud Boys email that went out to a bunch of Democratic voters in Florida. We've now said that that was an Iranian. That Iran is now the Proud Boys, which I don't know that I'm buying, but okay, this is what they're saying on the run up to the election. That it's no longer the white supremacists who want people to vote for Donald Trump. It's now the Iranians who want people to vote for Donald Trump. And also that the Russians now have all of our voting information. And evidently the Iranians do too. But here's the thing, and this is the dirty little secret. It's all really easily obtainable. You know, all of that stuff. Yeah, voting rolls are really, voter information, really easy to obtain. But here we are. This is I guess this is the closing argument. This is the push towards the end. Again, really weird to have the FBI director and the director of national intelligence coming out with this. And like I said, not quite sure I'm buying the Iran part. But let's say it's possible. For me, the message out of all of this is that the 90 million plus people who didn't vote last time around need to get registered, and they need to vote. Now here in Pennsylvania, if you're not registered, too late, you missed out. Nice job, moron. But you got to vote. I mean, ultimately, and I think, you know, Obama's famous for saying this, you know, if they can't steal all the votes. If they're going to steal 7 million, we need to get 8. If they're going to steal 10 million, then we need to get 11. This is the reality. So we, the people, have to vote. And look, you know, I'm looking at the two campaigns, and I'm looking at Donald Trump's closing argument. And Donald Trump's closing argument is the greatest line. 2016 was, "What do you got to lose?" He's not going to do that again with more than 220,000 people having been killed because of his screw up with the virus, and, you know, many more possibly to come. So what do you got to lose isn't what he's saying. Now he's saying that, evidently this is what he said in Erie, that they had it made. You know, they had it made before the virus. Everything was great. He wasn't coming anywhere near Erie. Maybe he'd send a phone call, maybe something, but he wasn't going to Erie. Now he's got to show up to Erie. Now I gotta come back here. And you go, I don't know that that's really the pitch, but again, these are the faithful. It doesn't matter what he does to them. He could dump in their hat and slap it on their head and they'd be, thank you. I can save this for the grandchildren. On the other side, you've got, I think, what is the better argument, because, you know, Barack Obama gave a speech today in Philadelphia at the what is that, PNC Park and the Lincoln Financial Field, all that big parking lot. They had a big drive-in rally there by the sports complex, and his argument, I thought, was great. You're going to be able to go about your lives. You're going to be able to go about your lives knowing that the president's not going to retweet conspiracy theory about secret cabals running the world, or that Navy SEALs didn't actually kill bin Laden. You're not going to have to look at, you know, tweeting at the television to fix things. He said, you know, Trump's, you know, making stuff up doesn't make people's lives better. You got to have a plan. And Obama was clear. He goes, look, we literally left you the pandemic playbook. And he said they probably used it to prop up a wobbly table somewhere. And my favorite line of his whole speech, and it's worth watching, because I got to tell you, I had my problems with Obama. I did. A lot of policy stuff. And again, it's all policy with me. He was a great speaker and instilled confidence, I believe, and calm. But he said, you know, the reality is Donald Trump isn't suddenly going to protect all of us. He can't even take basic steps to protect himself. And I thought that was probably the most, you know, that's the line right there. Here's a guy who clearly is incapable of caring for himself in this environment. Clearly someone who has this delusional thinking, because I'm still going back to, it's all going to go away. It'll all be fine. It'll just disappear one day. You'll see. It's going to be like magic. It's just going to go away. Same thing he said about the opioid addiction problem. It's just going to suddenly disappear. It's just going to all go away. We should have had him do the war on drugs thing. We wouldn't have had to lock anybody up. We could have just said, you know what, one day all those people who are on drugs just go, you know what, I don't want to do this anymore. And it's just going to all go away. But it's that kind of magic thinking that now has Republicans going, this isn't working for us. In fact, there are several prominent Republicans in the state of Texas who, after that call, that call the other day, are now saying, look, vote for Joe Biden. We need to get moving in some bit of sanity. And I see this as, and we predicted this would happen when he started the falter. The rats would jump ship. The rats are jumping ship. And all that are left are the cult members who bought the T-shirts and hats. All that's left are the people who have wrapped their identity up in whatever they saw in Trump as their savior. And the weird thing is, I've never had that savior complex. I've always looked at politicians with a jaundiced eye. I don't trust any of them across party lines. I'm a show me guy. Tell me what you're going to do. Show me what you're going to do, and then do what you're going to do. I've never had that blind faith. I don't have blind faith in Joe Biden. I do have a belief that he's a decent human being. So when I hear someone say, no, he's a fascist, socialist, commie, pedophile, that tells me more about the person saying it than it does about Joe Biden. That person clearly bought the hat and the T-shirt. I want those days to come back where we can talk about policy, because guess what's happened over the last 4 years? As a country, we haven't moved forward. Our infrastructure is still crap. We haven't made the kind of massive investments that we needed, 12, 16, 20 years ago. As long as I've been doing this show, and it's now 15 years, I've been saying we need a massive Eisenhower-esque kind of investment bill. We need to rebuild stuff from the ground up. Perfect example. Saw a story today that we're literally going to put 4G on the moon. We're going to put 4G on the moon. And I'm going, wouldn't it be great if we could have 4G right here where I live, to where I can make a damn phone call in the house without standing on one foot, leaning out the window, holding an antenna, hoping it rains to catch something? Wouldn't that be great? And again, it's because we haven't made the proper investments. Wouldn't it be great, instead of investing in the moon, whatever the moon is going to 4G us, that we get broadband access for everyone in rural communities, so I don't literally have to pay $300 a month for decent internet? Can we not have, some infrastructure that is going to move us into the 21st century? And again, look, the arguing's fun. I love the fact that I don't have to do any show prep here. I can just talk about what idiocy came out of Trump's mouth today, and what moronic tweets, and what kind of goofs and doofuses his supporters are. That's easy. That's the low-hanging fruit. The sad reality is, when I pull out of my damn driveway, I still hit a pothole. When I go across the bridge to get into Harrisburg, I'm still going, hope the damn thing doesn't collapse. There's a lot of things we should be doing, a lot of things that, with a Biden presidency, maybe we've got a shot at having the conversation of how we do that. How do we save the planet? How do we get health care for everyone? How do we make sure that the people who are 55 and older, who are now the most unemployed people in the country, can actually get health care and don't end up going bankrupt because of this pandemic? Maybe we should be talking about that. Maybe we should be talking about why the fact is we're ramming a Supreme Court justice through at a time when we haven't gotten a stimulus bill in place to save families from disaster. Maybe we could talk about policy for a change. I don't care about the cult of personality, never have. Never bought the Obama cult of personality, never got it. I talked about his policies. And even to this day, my wife will roll her eyes again. I'm still ticked. He shook my hand twice and lied to me because we didn't get anything close to the Employee Free Choice Act, let alone it or better. But I digress. We didn't have 8 years of insanity. And I think Obama's closing argument is a rational one. We could maybe have a family dinner without arguing with our crazy QAnon uncle. Maybe. Just one. Maybe there'll be some bit of wanting to go back to the fact-based world to where we don't distrust every institution. I mean, look, the reality is Trump has done a masterful job, and the Republican Party over the last 40 years has done a masterful job of pushing distrust of government. And then when they get in control, they do a great job of proving how distrustful and how badly run they can be, which is kind of that self-fulfilling prophecy that works for them. I'm hoping maybe we can go back to trusting smart people again. So when they tell us, maybe stay away from each other for a little bit, maybe, put a cloth over your face when you're around other people, maybe we'll listen. I mean, when Donald Trump says, if you vote for Joe Biden, he's going to listen to scientists, I'm okay with that. I actually think that's not a bad idea. Because guess what? We used to do that. We did. And guess what? It wasn't the end of the world. It wasn't the end of the world. And guess what else? Also, we didn't have major pandemics that killed a couple 100,000 people. And that we're heading into what many experts are saying could be the worst part of it. And the worst part of it with a guy who's been at the helm, who keeps having this magic thinking that eventually it's just going to disappear. It's all going to go away. It's all going to be great. Just amazing times. Love to hear your thoughts. You can email me, rick@thericksmithshow.com. Quick break. Right back. Stick around.
There's nothing more American than workers standing up, and the union gives a voice to win. On the Rick Smith Show.
I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 1912. That was the day mill workers began to walk off the job at the Phoenix and Gilbert knitting mills in Little Falls, New York. The strike was sandwiched between the Bread and Roses strike in Lawrence, Massachusetts, and the 1913 Patterson textile strike. American, Hungarian, Polish, and Italian workers, over 70% of them women, struck against wage reductions. Their hours had just been cut from 60 hours a week to 54, and their wages adjusted accordingly. A recent Factory Inspection Commission investigation revealed deplorable working and living conditions, among the worst in the state. As a result, state legislators passed protective legislation restricting women's work hours. Many social reformers pushed for laws like these in the hopes of improving women's quality of life by minimizing their exploitation on the job. But the reduction in hours spelled disaster for these mill women, who then faced a loss of income that ranged between 75 cents and $2 a week. Socialists in nearby Schenectady, including the socialist mayor George Lunn, arrived in town and were promptly arrested for giving open-air speeches in support of the strikers. IWW organizers soon followed to help organize picketing, daily strike parades, and strike committees for each of the factories. They quickly established IWW Local 801, the National Industrial Union of Textile Workers. By the end of the month, mounted police closed in on the women strikers and began clubbing them, many into unconsciousness. The police raided strike headquarters and arrested IWW strike committee leaders. But the women strikers stood strong and were celebrating victory by the end of the year. They won full reinstatement and 60 hours pay for 54 hours work. Labor History in 2 brought to you by the Illinois Labor History Society and The Rick Smith Show.
Welcome back to The Rick Smith Show. Now, here is Rick Smith.
So as I said 4 years ago, we want to see the tax returns for a bunch of reasons, and we still haven't. We've seen what has been leaked out, but 4 years ago when the election was going on in 2016, you go, hey, we want to know who Trump is beholden to. We want to know where his money is. We want to know where conflict of interest may be, and granted, I got pushback from people. Oh, you just want bad stuff, and yeah, that's part of it too. But now we find out from the analysis of the tax records by the New York Times that evidently our U.S. tax-paying president, who for a decade didn't pay anything, actually paid $180,000 in taxes to China from 2013 to 2015. Now, it's under the guise of his company, but what caught my attention is they set up this account to do business in China, but never did any business at all. There were no transactions. There was no business done. They never used it for anything. There were no deals. There was nothing. But yet they paid $180,000 in taxes. And here at home, zip. That is our tax dodger and chief. And here to share some thoughts on the recent news, I've asked Mark Rickling to come talk with us. Mark is the policy and legislative director there at Americans for Tax Fairness. Mark, thanks for taking time for us.
Thanks for having me on your show again, Rick. It's always a pleasure.
So, have you seen this story? Evidently, China taxes at a much higher rate than the U.S. does. He paid $180,000 for nothing. They just gave him $180,000 for doing no business.
It's absolutely amazing. It seems like every 3 or 4 days, there's a new bombshell that the New York Times releases. They got obviously 18 years of tax records. And there's so much material in there. Every 3 or 4 days, it's another, what is actually going on? How is it that China, a communist country, can tax our president for business he's trying to do there, trying to get a hotel deal there, never went through, whereas we in the United States of America can't seem to levy any tax on him except for the past 2 years when he was president and he paid $750. It's absolutely amazing.
It is, and I guess this is one of those moments where, because one of the things his campaign and his surrogates are running around is, Joe Biden's going to raise your taxes. We're going to pay, what was it, 50 cents said you're going to pay 60% tax or some nonsense like this. And I'll be honest with you, I think 50 cents should pay 60% tax, but it's still nonsense.
I think you're exactly right. That story has taken sort of a life of its own, and there are a couple key facts that aren't being accurately reported in the sort of 50 cent, 60% tax rate. I think number one is that that's the marginal rate. So Joe Biden would raise taxes on the very rich. He's upfront about that. Over $400,000, Joe Biden would not raise anyone's taxes whatsoever. And for somebody making $4,000 or $400,000, that first dollar is going to face a higher tax rate for Joe Biden, but all that income under $400,000, same taxes as before. So that's a marginal rate. So that 60% scare number, they're not telling you that. That's only on the very top of your income.
Yeah, to highlight that, you go back to the Eisenhower tax code, which I talk about a lot. The top marginal tax rate back then was 92%. So if you really want to scare 50 cent, let's go back to let's go back to a good socialist president like Dwight David Eisenhower.
You're exactly right. And so 90%, that's just the headline rate. That doesn't count in your deductions. That doesn't count in stuff that you get to not count as official taxable income. So what's really important here is looking at what the effective tax rate is. For the very richest people, we're talking like millionaires, they're paying essentially an effective tax rate of 20%, which is what working families pay, which is what people on minimum wage, if they don't have children and they earn a certain amount enough per year, will pay a 20% tax rate. It's not right in the country that people that have so much and are making out like bandits now pay the same tax rate as working families. So if you look at an analysis of Joe Biden's tax rate, what would be that actual tax rate that someone who makes over $1 million a year would face? It would be 40%. I think most people now in today's world, understanding what a problem income inequality is, think that a 40% rate on someone who's making $1 million every year is pretty fair.
I'm right there with you, but at the end of this, We can't have this conversation, Mark. We've been trained like Pavlovian dogs to any time the dreaded T word pops up, that immediately our ears shut down and we just start spewing. Because I can't tell you how many times I've tried to explain this to people, that if you're making under $400,000, which the vast majority of us are, you're not going to see any change. If you're making over, where a lot of, I think you guys are the ones who came out with the number that since the pandemic, the 600 wealthiest people in this country have seen their wealth grow by almost $1 trillion. Those are the people we're talking about. And look, it's not that I'm envious. It's because that's where the money is that we need to fix our broken infrastructure, to fund our education systems, to fund healthcare, to do the things that we need as a society, instead of just having a handful of people hoarding all of this wealth. It just seems silly to me.
You couldn't be more right. Why is it that you have to worry about that bridge when you drive to Harrisburg? Is it going to fall down or not? It's because people like Donald Trump, fabulously wealthy people, are not paying their fair share. They're paying $750 a year. That does not go very far. That is not going to repair our nation's broken infrastructure. It's not going to get our economy started and help but dig us out of this coronavirus recession. So what we really need to do is make sure those at the top, the people, like you mentioned, the nation's billionaires who've made close to $1 trillion during the course of the pandemic. It still boggles my mind how the nation's richest people can make money hand over fist when our economy is tanking or in the middle of a pandemic. We need these people to start contributing their fair share, to put America back to work, to fix our infrastructure, to make necessary investments in our country that have been starving for resources for far too long.
Yeah, but here's the weird thing, and I've talked to some very wealthy people who say, look, we want to pay more taxes, we want to invest in our country, we want to do the right thing. There's a group that we have on occasionally, Patriotic Millionaires, who they're talking about the same stuff. Because they don't want to end up like Brazil. I have a friend who grew up in Brazil, and he says even if you're doing just moderately well, you got to worry about someone snatching your kids for ransom or any of the other horrible things that go on. And as we're heading down this path and inequality grows worse and worse and worse by the day, I fear someday we could be that country.
I have the same exact fear. As you sort of take a step backwards and you think, why is there all this acrimony? Why is there all this division in our society today? Why do these, frankly, racist appeals seem to resonate among so many people? Why does anyone think that building a wall between the US and Mexico is the solution to all our problems? Why would people actually think that way? And then you take a step backwards and you think, this isn't so different than what happened in the Great Depression in the 1930s. How did governments, right-wing governments, fascist governments, convince people to go along with them? It's because they blamed Jews, blamed gypsies, blamed crazy communist union organizers for making things bad. And when you have a society that is so divided, there is so much inequality, I think it's incredibly dangerous from a democratic perspective, from a perspective like you're talking about in Brazil, where it's just, people are in poverty, people are in dire straits, there's a lot of crime, and it really lends a fertile breeding ground to demagogues to take advantage of that situation.
I'm often reminded of a quote that's attributed to a railroad magnate from the 1880s. His name was Jay Gould. He said, "I could easily pay half of the country to murder the other half," and we're living that right now. I mean, we're so polarized as a nation that we can't even seem to agree that we want to pave the roads or have better infrastructure or have better schools, or we certainly can't agree on health care. It just seems like, that quote rings true more and more every day.
I think you're right. And we can't even agree on the same basic set of facts. Is the coronavirus real? Wearing masks, does that help stop it? This is something that we debate, and it seems to me to be absolutely crazy. But I think the good news is that there's a path forward, that if we elect the right kind of leaders, if we see a change in DC, we can start to put together the policies that include making the rich pay their fair share and restore some of that equality that we saw through vast parts of the 20th century. The post-World War II economy wasn't perhaps good for women, wasn't perhaps good for African Americans, and both of those groups had to fight their fight to become full members of our society. But I think, by and large, there wasn't the vast amount of economic inequality that we see now that I think is really driving a lot of this division, a lot of this hate in our society.
Yeah, I mean, for me, again, it comes back down to policy, and I try and have these policy discussions. You know, recently I've been spending a lot of time talking to Trump supporters, who don't seem to want to talk about policy. It's the cult. It's, you know, I bought the hat and the shirt, so I'm in the gang. Do you see a chance for us in the future, if there is a Biden presidency, to maybe start talking about actual policy? Because look, I think we got into this mess. And, you know, some people have disagreed with me, but I think we've got into this mess because of the bad policy of the past. You know, we have this mass inequality because of a rigged tax code. We have the policy of wages being stolen from workers because you had the policy of destroying unions and not supporting the right to collective bargaining and the right to strike. We made these choices politically. And I say we can unmake them if we just choose the right path. Now, we also need politicians who are going to actually follow through on them. And that's a whole nother argument for another day. But to me, Donald Trump's just not that guy.
He is definitely not that guy. And, you know, fingers crossed he will be on his way out come November. But I do think, you know, this acrimony and this division and this partisanship, this rank partisanship is not going to go away overnight. But I definitely think that if we fight hard and we organize, that we can start to make real differences in the course of this country. It's definitely on a bad path now, but I think with a Biden victory and a Democratic sweep come November, knock on wood, we can start to do good things. Good things when we emerge from this recession, and we need revenues to make needed investments in infrastructure. That's definitely something that we can do. And you look at polling data, and if you see polling data, it's pretty consistent that the American people want good things. Both Republicans and Democrats think the rich are not paying their fair share. Well, why can't we here in DC, and I'm in Washington, DC right now, why can't we seem to listen to the American people and to make policy that would have them pay their fair share? Hopefully we will be able to do that moving forward.
No, I sure hope so. You're listening to The Rick Smith Show. We're with Mark Rickling, Policy and Legislative Director with Americans for Tax Fairness. You can check out their work at americansfortaxfairness.org. We'll make sure we get links out. You can check that out on social media. Now, you know, the next administration is going to have some chaos, I believe, on their hands, where all the indications are the virus is going to get worse. You know, they're calling it a third wave. I still think it's only the second, because I don't think we ever got out of the first wave. But there's another wave potentially going to hit. There's the possibility of Amy Coney Barrett being on the Supreme Court and undoing the Affordable Care Act. So healthcare insecurity is going to go through the roof. You know, again, you know, talking from the tax part of all this, there's a lot of chaos coming, especially around healthcare, isn't there?
I think you're right, but you know, once sanity is restored, I think we as a nation can come together. And you think of in our nation's past, in times of great tragedy, that we pulled together. Certainly during World War II, that was true. I would say too, you know, right after 9/11, I'm not a big fan of George W. Bush, but he definitely took a different tone and a different approach to pulling the country together after those attacks. Obviously, with you know, the neocons in charge, it went way off course and needlessly attacking Iraq and, you know, the whole disaster there. But I think we have this in our history, and I think once we have a president that respects that and who wants to be president for the whole American people and just not his own supporters, that President Biden will be able to rally the American people. And I think one of the things he's going to do in a new administration, we really don't need the revenue to pay for all the good things that we need now to get us out of this pandemic. But I think he's going to make a good faith effort to show that the rich need to pay their fair share. So if that's, you know, taking away the worst tax breaks of the 2017 Trump tax cut, maybe it's restoring the corporate tax rate. Biden said he would do that on day one. He's going to make a good faith effort to start to bring some of the revenues from the very richest people, those billionaires that have made almost $1 trillion during this pandemic. And I think that the American people will see that he's serious and that he means it. And that just wasn't some campaign thing that he told people that he knows that it polls well with the American populace. But now that I'm in office, it's not going to be easy, so I'm not going to do it. I really am looking for a Biden administration to make tax fairness a central piece of his agenda for the first 100 days.
Yeah, you said that we don't really need the revenue. I seem to think we do. You're obviously the expert. You're the one who studies this stuff much more than I do. But I've always said I'm a tax and spend liberal. I want to raise the revenue that I need to build the things that we need. We pay our bills, as opposed to our conservative friends who are just borrow and spend. And if you look at the last 3 years of the Trump administration, we've had $1 trillion plus deficits each and every year. And I'm still asking, where are my T-Twizzler friends who were screaming all during the Obama years about the debt and deficits? It hasn't happened. Now, look, we need the deficit spend right now. Yeah. But I'm most certainly someone who believes you got to pay your bills.
Yeah, I think in normal times, you're absolutely right. I would just correct one thing you said. So with the 2017 tax cut, the Republicans borrowed and they didn't spend. They borrowed and cut a big check to their wealthy donors. So there was no investment. Trump said he wanted to do a $2 million investment deal in our nation's infrastructure. The sort of self-proclaimed grand deal maker never got that deal done, never really tried to do that. His tax cuts cost $2 trillion over 10 years. And essentially, it was a big fat check to those billionaires, the ones that are bankrolling his campaign and the ones that are making out like bandits now.
Yeah. And a quick reminder to all of my friends who go, hey, I got a tax cut. Those sunset in 2025.
All the individual. Yep. Exactly.
Just to throw
and the
that
corporate
out there.
ones, the corporate ones are permanent, Rick.
Forever and ever. It shows you where the priorities are. But Mark, I appreciate the time and the good work you guys do at Americans for Tax Fairness. I hope folks will check out the website, americansfortaxfairness.org. Lots of really good stuff there. Mark, thanks so much. I appreciate the time.
Always a pleasure, Rick. Thank you.
Mark Rickling, he is the legislative and policy director there at Americans for Tax Fairness. I'd love to hear your thoughts. You can email me, rick@thericksmithshow.com. How do we move forward on the tax issue? You can share with me there. Quick break. Right back. Stick around. You're listening to The Rick Smith Show.
Remembering that united we bargain, divided we beg. Rick Smith.
I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 2001. That was the day that Thomas Morris Jr. died from breathing in anthrax. A week earlier, he had been exposed to the deadly poison when an envelope containing the powdery substance was opened at the mail distribution center where he worked. Thomas Morris was a member of the American Postal Workers Union. His union brother, Joseph Cursine, died 2 days later. Both men worked at the U.S. Postal Service Brentwood Processing and Distribution Center in Washington, D.C. The poisoned letters were addressed to Senators Tom Daschle and Patrick Leahy. More postal workers at a distribution center in New Jersey also fell ill from exposure to anthrax-poisoned mail. In total, 22 people were sickened by anthrax that fall from letters addressed to politicians and news outlets. In addition to those injured, 5 people died, including a 7-month-old infant who was visiting NBC News in New York City with his mother who worked there. Coming the month after the September 11th attacks, the anthrax poisoning sent another wave of fear of terrorism throughout the United States. The Brentwood Distribution Center was closed down for decontamination until December 2003. When it reopened, the facility was renamed for the 2 fallen postal workers. The next year, Senator Joe Lieberman gave an address to the APWU. He said, quote, "The postal workers who were exposed to anthrax and still got the mail out and kept our system running. They are proud union members. I know I'll never forget that, and America won't forget that. All of you at the APWU deserve our respect and our support." One person suspected of the poisonings committed suicide, and the case was closed. No one was ever convicted of the crimes. For more information, go to laborhistoryin2.com, like us on Facebook, follow us on Twitter at laborhistoryin2.
Welcome back to the Rick Smith Show. Now, here is Rick Smith.
So the other big story today, it was reported that Purdue Pharmaceuticals, you may remember them, the Oxy people, the opioid folks, evidently they've agreed to plead guilty to 3 criminal counts, 3 felony criminal counts. They've agreed to pay a settlement potentially worth at least $8.3 billion. And they're talking about moving the company's status from that of a private corporation with the bottom line as their focus to a publicly held trust to serve the common good, which I'm not quite sure how I feel about that yet. I got to see more details. But interesting in moving forward. Now, interestingly enough, you got Kellyanne Conway and the other Republican Trump sympathizers out there saying, "Oh, Donald Trump did this. We got to thank Donald for, and Melania for creating awareness and treatment and this prosecution." And I got to be honest, over the last couple of years, I've heard a lot about the opioid crisis out of the Trump administration, other than back in 2017 when he declared it a public health emergency and said that the number of drug users and addicts will start to tumble downward over a period of years. You're going to see them fall. It's all going to come down. And then a year later said, it'll be a beautiful thing to see. The scourge of drug addiction will stop. It will stop, he said. We will raise a drug-free generation of kids. Now, last year, sadly, highest year that we've seen the highest year ever, I guess. 72,000 people estimated lost their lives, a 12% increase over the time when Trump was elected. So it's gotten worse under his call. But hey, facts be damned. Donald's doing a great job. Anyway, here to share some thoughts on possibly a little bit about the settlement and about this addiction. I've asked Dr. David Reese to come talk with us. He's a psychiatrist, a qualified medical examiner, also the co-author of the New York Times bestseller, Dangerous Case. David, thanks for taking time for us.
My pleasure, thanks.
So let's start with the announcement. You buying any of this? You think $8.3 billion is going to be enough?
Enough for what?
To cover the damage that they've done. Look, there are millions of people who need treatment, millions of people who need to, help to get off of this stuff that they were told was safe, that Purdue knew was addictive. I don't know that $8.3 billion is enough to clean up the mess they've caused.
Yeah, exactly. I was saying that facetiously for what? Because it is such a horrible situation now, and has been for a number of years, that any help is useful, and $8 billion isn't a drop in the bucket, but compared to what's needed, it's a drop in the bucket. The number of people who are having problems with it, and it's not only the people who are addicted, and now during COVID they're having hard times even getting into rehab programs because you can't run groups, you can't have the programs that we need to have right now. But the number of people that I've personally seen admitted to psych hospitals for depression and other issues who don't themselves have substance abuse issues, but one of the main triggers of their depression was losing someone to opioids, whether it be a child, a parent, a significant other. So, it would be impossible to put a number on how much is needed because it's the entire mental health system that's infected by opiates at this point.
Yeah,
There's hardly anyone who comes into a hospital these days for psych reasons that doesn't have some connection to the opiate crisis.
Wow. I have a dear friend who, a little over a year ago, lost her brother to opioid addiction. A young man, was in an accident. It started off as, he was in pain. They gave it to him, told him it was safe. And before you know it, he's hooked on the stuff and can't get off.
Yeah. And you see it, and this goes directly to the pharmaceuticals. You see people who started on the path to addiction through being prescribed legitimately meds, but then it got out of control, and then it was cheaper to get on the street than it was to get prescriptions, and they get more and more into it. You see a lot of people who took their parents or siblings or aunt, uncle, grandfather, grandmother's meds and started to get hooked. So the number of people who started from what were prescribed meds and often overprescribed meds is extremely high. And at the same time, it's created such a stigma that people who really suffer from chronic pain are having difficulty finding treatment because there are a lot of docs who don't want to take the risk anymore.
Yeah.
So, I mean, the whole system is infected.
And it all, to me, it started because, one of the things that they give Purdue Pharmaceuticals credit for, and, I like the way the one article I read put it, they were the people who pioneered medical advertising. They were the people who were out there telling you, hey, you got a pain? Yeah, here's this for you. In fact, one of the emails that's supposedly out there from one of their executives is, they want to push it like Doritos.
Right.
To where people are, consuming this stuff. And look, I've often said we're a society that doesn't want to feel anything, let alone pain. So this just feeds right into that. And then here we are.
Yeah. Yeah. And, it was really a combination of there being a different attitude towards treating pain, which in some ways was good, but it was very much distorted by drugs being put out like Vicodin, where initially we were told Vicodin is a non-addictive opiate, just like we were told initially that Xanax is a non-addictive benzo. And it just got totally out of hand, and the combination of the pharmaceuticals trying to treat pain legitimately in the environment of having basically false information, at times very intentionally, and then the drug cartels, because of that, adopting a different, basically selling platform. So they went into a whole different area. They didn't need to go to the streets. They could just go to the people who were addicted from having been prescribed.
Right.
As a matter of fact, and I have no interest, no financial interest in it. A very good book on that is Dreamland by Sam Quinones, which describes how the prescription of opiates, the cartels, all sort of, without talking to each other, interwove to create this crisis that's nationwide.
And at the end of it, where my mind has gone is we've taken pharmaceuticals as something that we need to live and make our lives better, and we've put them into a profit-seeking product that they keep pushing on us. You can't turn on a TV channel without, hey, talk to your doctor. Is this right for you? I mean, every time I go to my doctor's office, I go, hey, is this right for me? And he knows he knows I'm never going to take it. But in fact, the one time it was about women going to the bathroom in the morning or whatever it is, and I said, "Hey, is this right for me?" And he goes, "No, it's not right for you. You're the wrong gender." I go, "Just checking."
Yeah, I mean, what I say only half facetiously is that if your doctor needs to learn medicine from you via a commercial, find a different doctor. That person should hang up their shingles and get out of it.
That is an excellent point. Now, but here's the weird thing, and I've talked about this, a while ago. I remember back in the '90s, late '90s, I would go to the doctor, and there would be, just the cutest blonde with the short black skirt with the little roller case behind her, and couldn't been more than 23, 25, somewhere in that age. So being basically a drug pusher, going into these doctors' offices and just loading them up with these drugs, and I remember asking the doctor, why are they doing this? Why are they pushing you the drugs? Aren't you supposed to know which ones you want prescribed instead of? And he said, look, it's the way the industry was going at the time. Isn't that a big part of this problem? I mean, I think they've calmed that down a little bit since that era, but this idea that it's this commodity that needs to be pushed on us, because I don't know. I mean, I'm in this weird spot that everybody I know takes something.
Yeah. No, it's a big push. It is better now. I mean, I've refused to see any reps for probably 2 decades. But there are more rules on that now. But what you said is not just, it's not sexist, because they were literally recruiting cheerleaders to be the drug reps. That there were drug companies, and this is documented, who were recruiting cheerleaders because they would have the presentation to the docs that would be useful. And they would give you some useful information, but then there was always other stuff with it. I mean, I remember one time I received in the mail an apple from a drug company to try to push a specific medication. This wasn't even a pain medication. So, like, why are they spending money on shipping apples nationwide when that can go into research? Send me the literature, send me the information so I can evaluate it. What the hell do I want with an apple when I'm thinking about which antipsychotic to prescribe?
No, that's an excellent point. But the other part of this is your profession has people who are their spokespeople, who were pushing what we now know is less than accurate information because they were on the payroll.
They were on the payroll. There were people who were high up in the psychiatric community and the APA who were actually having papers and books ghost written by drug companies. I mean, there was a lot of complicity. There were people who didn't realize what was going on and were sort of naive, but there were those who knew exactly what was going on and complicit. And another part of it, which pertains partly to pain but partly to psychiatry, and I won't go into details, is the split between providing counseling or therapy, and a lot of people with chronic pain are depressed and need it, and prescription of meds, where it became that psychiatrists and now nurse practitioners and psychiatrists only do meds, and then you go to someone else for counseling, but meanwhile the person who's doing meds is there to prescribe meds and nothing but. So it's pretty difficult in that position for someone to say, well, you really don't need it, you really should be getting therapy instead. So that also perverted the whole system, and pushed people towards a medication for everything.
No, absolutely. And this is where, I said at the beginning, we're a country that doesn't want to feel anything, let alone pain. It's easier just to take a pill. But
right.
In looking at part of this settlement where they're moving it from a for-profit private corporation to something to serve the public good, part of me goes, that might not be a bad idea, because we're not now producing for the sole purpose of creating profit, of getting as many units out the door to pad the bottom line and pay a CEO and a board of directors and all that stuff to keep people fat and happy at the top. We're actually talking about public health. I'm curious your thoughts.
Well, theoretically, it sounds great. And to get the profit motive out of it would surely be a big positive step. But then you look at the government now or in the past. I mean, yeah, the corruption now is at a whole different level, but it's not like there hasn't been corruption in the past. But yeah, let's say they set up a whole wonderful sounding program and Jared is in charge of it. What are you going to expect?
Yeah, good point. No, you're absolutely right.
It's a great idea, but until I see who's involved and exactly what the criteria are, skepticism is the word for the day.
No, I'm right there with you, because here's the thing, and the bottom line for me is, I don't want people who are truly suffering to not be able to get the pain medications that they need, because look, as people point out to me, it's not addictive for everybody. A lot of people use them. They use them as prescribed, short term, gets them through what they need to get through. In fact, when I had my hip surgery, they gave me a prescription. I didn't take them, but they gave me a prescription. If I needed them, they were potentially there. I get that, but I don't want to take it away from people who are going to need it, because we've got this problem of a percentage, and I don't know how big the percentage of people who take it to percentage who get hooked on it, but I know it's a huge problem when you got 72,000 people last year who died from it.
Right. Yeah, we really don't know the percentage because we don't see the people who do well and are responsible. So, it's hard to say. Yeah, you could look at the number of prescriptions, but even that isn't really a solid database. So we don't know the percentage, and probably most people don't get in trouble, but the number that do is huge. I mean, it's something like COVID in that way, where, most people don't have a serious problem with it, but when you do, it's real serious, and it changes families and causes deaths, and it's horribly tragic.
Yeah, and it's one of those things where they say it's really difficult to get off of. I've seen some documentaries that are just wow, and you ask yourself how do you get on that path, but until it comes close to home, until you have to deal with it or know somebody, it seems so foreign. But it's something that we should be really focusing on, and I don't think this administration's done that, no matter what Kellyanne Conway says.
Yeah, we need to look at both physiological, as to which people have a physiological propensity to be addicted and really shouldn't be on these meds, as well as the psychological. If someone's depressed, if someone has a history of substance abuse in the past, we know some of the risk factors, but we don't know it well enough.
Yeah. Now, last question I've got for you: the $8.3 billion that they're talking about. My fear is that ends up in some general pots across the country. I know, states like Oklahoma sued to try and get money to set up, treatment facilities. How in a quick couple minutes, how would you want to see that divvied up in a way that actually filters down to people? Because again, like a lot of things, I worry that it gets absorbed in other places.
Right. Very difficult. Some of it should go to education. Some of it should go to, pain management education. Obviously, a lot of it has to go to treatment, but the quality of treatment can vary from actually being treatment to being something where a lot of the treatment facilities, you have the pushes standing outside ready to catch people as soon as they come out. So unless it's really comprehensively organized to provide treatment and psychosocial intervention in total, it may be wasted.
Yeah, and it's got to come back to the doctors. I know I've been harsh on the doctors for being the ones who prescribe this stuff and who because they're the gateway to getting it. At least in my view, they've got to be a huge part of this as well.
Well, I'll end with one statement. Every hospital I've worked in, the staff knew which doctors in the community, they're going there, we know they're going to get anything they want. So, it's really well known, but there's no real oversight that you can do anything about it right now.
Well, maybe this will send a sign. Maybe I'm hoping somebody goes to jail. They're going to plead to 3 criminal felony counts. I don't know if that means the CEO is going to jail. I hope so. But we will see. But Dr. Reese, I appreciate the time, the thoughts, and your expertise. As always, great talking with you.
Anytime. My pleasure. Thank you very much, and you take care and be safe.
You as well. Our good friend, Dr. David Reese, psychiatrist, qualified medical examiner, also the co-author of the New York Times bestseller, Dangerous Case. I'll make sure you check that out. Going to take a quick break. Right back after this. Stick around. You're listening to The Rick Smith Show. We're working people. Come to talk.
Remembering that united we bargain, divided we beg. Rick Smith.
I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 1999. That was the day that 270 workers from the Embassy Vacation Resorts in Maui voted to join Local 5 of the Hotel Employees and Restaurant Employees Union. Local 5 got its start in Hawaii in 1938. Back then, it was called the Hotel and Restaurant Employees and Bartenders International Union. Today, it's a local of Unite Here. Local 5 was part of the surge of union organizing in Hawaii during the 1930s and 1940s. Starting in the 1950s, tourism became increasingly important for the Hawaiian economy. From 1940 to 1957, sugar production jobs on the island declined from 35,000 down to 17,000. With the rise of air travel, more and more jobs opened up in the tourism industry. Today, tourism is the largest gross domestic product of Hawaii. It represents 21% of the Hawaiian economy. Visitors spent $14 billion on the islands in 2012. Yet the service sector workers who made this growth of the tourism industry possible often work long hours for low wages. Many resorts and hotels fight any effort to bring in a union. Such was the case at the Embassy Vacation Resorts. In 1998, the employees voted against forming a union by a count of 126 to 86. The union challenged the results of the election and won. They held a second election the next year. During their organizing drive, 4 employees were fired at the resort. In 2003, the National Labor Relations Board found that the employees had been let go for their union activities. The company was ordered to reinstate the workers. These legal decisions were victories by the service workers of Hawaii in their fight to win union protections. Like what you hear? Check out more at laborhistoryin2.com.
Sometimes I don't know whether to weep uncontrollably, laugh hysterically, or just throw up. I recently did all three when I saw another gusher of greed pouring out of corporate America. This one is especially nauseating, given today's raging health crisis, for the culprits are major healthcare corporations. One perpetrator is Larry Merlo, CEO of our country's largest drugstore chain, CVS. In this time of COVID-19, customers are surging into the chain's 10,000 stores for everything from medications to masks. Yet, the boss has blithely left many of the pharmacies so severely understaffed that they pose a danger to public health. CVS pharmacists tell of frantically scrambling to keep up with filling prescriptions, answering ever-ringing phone inquiries, giving shots and COVID tests, stocking toilet paper, tending the drive-thru, etc., while also having to meet ceaseless corporate demands for cost-cutting and more profit. The result has been a dangerous work overload, with many pharmacists handling nearly 200 prescriptions in a 6-hour shift, about one every 2 minutes. Unsurprisingly, there's been an alarming rise in serious errors and week-long delays in providing critical medications for customers. Adding to the exasperation of local managers, who are allowed no say in staffing, is the infuriating level of heedless greed at the top. The New York Times reports that while CEO Merlo has failed to fund the staff his pharmacies need, he has generously funded his own needs. He paid himself $36.5 million last year alone. Then there's the mountain of interest payments and fees that CVS is paying to Wall Street bankers and lawyers who engineered Merlo's takeover of the Aetna health insurance giant last year. This is Jim Hightower saying, so while you're being underserved at a local CVS, just remember that bossman Merlo and his merger mercenaries are making a killing.
Hightower's commentaries are brought to you by the Hightower Lowdown, the monthly newsletter with Hightower's take on what Wall Street and Washington are up to. For information, visit hightowerlowdown.org.
Welcome back to the Rick Smith Show. Now, here is Rick Smith.
So today I had one of those weird little walk down memory lane. My son was, we were talking about, protesting, and we were talking about, all of the things going on in our communities, and all the stuff that that's in the headlines. And he's like, I haven't done enough of this stuff, and I go, well, you started out young. And he didn't believe that, when he was 16 months old, he had his first protest. But oddly enough, our local newspaper still has the article online from 2007. I tweeted it out earlier and embarrassed him because it's the most adorable picture in the world. But it was when his oldest sister was, going to kindergarten, and the class sizes were enormous. And we went to the school board meeting to say, hey, you can allocate resources better to better educate our kids. Oddly enough, they did it the next year. I kind of take offense by that, but at least they did it. But there was the picture of him and his sister protesting for education, which I thought was, a great way to have our conversation. Which brings me to today's conversation with our good friends at the Badass Teachers Association. There are a lot of laws on the books to make sure that our kids are getting the education they need. Some good, some bad. The most recent one that I've come across is laws that mandate that kids read by the 3rd grade. That's why I've asked Stephanie Rizdal-Fear to come talk with us. She's an education blogger, public school advocate, and educator. Stephanie, thanks for taking time for us.
Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate listening to you, but what I really appreciate is your focus on public education, because I think in order to solve a lot of our world issues, we have to have a strong public education school system. So thank you so much. No, it's important. And I think right now we're seeing in our political discourse, I would argue some of the failings of our system in helping us to bridge some of these ideological gaps and being able to actually converse. And I think education is the way forward. Absolutely. Me too. I am a huge proponent. I'm a former public school teacher, a former, public school graduate. And now I have children in the public school, so I am very dedicated to the cause. Yeah, we've had, our oldest daughter graduated this year. In fact, as I was saying at the beginning, we had a little protest in front of the Board of Education with signs and everything, because we wanted smaller class sizes. We wanted the kids to get a good opportunity.
And we demanded the most from our kids. And for me, I read your article and on why these laws on mandating third graders read are harmful. Personally, our kids did. So I'm happy about that. But I want you to explain why you think it's bad to set that kind of a bar for kids to read, because I think most people would say we want our kids to be reading by third grade, and if they can't, we need to make sure that they can before they move forward. So
I can agree with that. I think that the issue is the test itself. I don't think that test in particular really can assess readers. I think that we have narrowed the focus of what reading is. And my kids were readers by third grade as well. However, the problem with these mandates is that they now have trickled down to kindergarten. So you actually, within like the two states that my children, they were in Colorado first, and then we're in Minnesota now. But they already, like within a couple of weeks of kindergarten, they are testing children to determine if they are deficient readers. And so the problem itself is the test. I really don't believe this test can tell us much about who a reader is, but also the fact that it has now trickled down to kindergarten, and then these tests become, you teach to the test. You see what I'm saying? And so the instructional piece of it has really gotten to be very concerning to me.
Yeah, for me, the whole institution seems to be moving towards, almost like factory work, and that, we have these hard caps on things. But what do you say to the person? And I get this from folks who go, there are studies out there that say if you can predict if a child's going to go to prison, by second or third grade based on their reading scores, and some of them are fairly accurate. Now, granted, these are in districts that are high poverty rates and a lot of that stuff that play along with it. But what do you say to those people who use reading as that metric by which they're looking at the future for these kids?
Well, and once again, I can support that we need to have literate children. I would not support the idea that this is what is doing that. And I think that, if anything, it's hindering children to become readers because of the machines that we're creating in them. And, for instance, they come into kindergarten already having to take a computerized test, and that determines what path they take. They're labeled as deficient. And then the child themselves, they don't get a chance to explore, to discover, to do all of these things. So, and the other issue is that they're coming in at the age of 5, when we know that the average reader starts at the age of 7. My own daughter, they, wanted to label her as that, and she was only, 5. And I talked to the teacher, and she just kind of took a deep breath. You're right. She says we need to do. She's young. She's okay. She is okay. But I think also I would challenge the whole idea that the Read by Third Grade campaign necessarily equates to, prison time and such like that, because I know that my blog also got posted on Diane Ravitch, and Laura Chapman talked about it. And she talked about that there has been a campaign for this Read by Third Grade by 36 foundations and corporations. And they then did their own research that was never peer reviewed. And so it's really concerning to me that this maybe isn't the best. In fact, she said what really matters is how they come into the 9th grade. And ultimately, we know that these laws were created by ALEC, American Legislation Exchange Council. They weren't created by educators.
Yeah, they never seem to be created by actual teachers. They're usually created by the profiteers, the people who suck off of our tax dollar.
Exactly. And so I'm not saying that I don't support literacy, early literacy, but I think what these laws have done have damaged literacy practice, and what they really have done is hurt us, because I can look at like the stats that they use, and it shows that like the scores in Minnesota in particular have gone down like 4 percentage points since they've enacted this law. And I think that, my other concern is that these laws, how capitalism needs a good crisis to make money, right? And so what they've done with these is they show that our kids are in crisis. And so what are they going to do? They're going to throw money, or they're going to make money out of different programs. For instance, I heard you this morning with the whole Google lawsuit. And the computers in schools are also extremely concerning to me, because they have kind of become a monopoly, and from my opinion, and I don't know that they're necessarily what's best for children. But I just learned tonight that Lauren Jobs has bought out a computer program, Amplify, which is basically all reading instruction put on a computer. And I just don't think that's best practice. And I don't know, are you familiar with the book Let the Children Play?
Yes.
Okay. So in it, Nancy Carlson Page, she talks about how she went and explored kindergarten classrooms in Florida. And she said it was sterile. The walls were barren. And the teachers had, Orwellian language on the walls saying, be quiet, sit still. And they had kids practicing how to fill in bubbles on a computer. And it was just so stark. And it's so not what children need.
No,
we know that children learn best through play. And kindergarten and first grade teachers, and that's the problem too, is that we have gotten rid of the respect for teachers, but also how their experience matters. And we have then now relied on the program. So I would argue that since No Child Left Behind has been implemented, we know that they've starved schools, obviously. We know that they have really forced a lot of teachers out because teachers have a hard time following a particular prescribed program because it's not what's best for kids. And so, and we know that the quality of the teacher really improves the quality of the learning.
I'm right there with you. But, when I look at this, I think back to my own experience going through school because, I was a horrible out loud reader.
Right.
I was terrible.
Right.
And it was because it was a couple of things. It was I didn't like standing up in front of the classroom, and it was a self-image thing and part of that. But it was also that I didn't breathe well. I didn't take breaths at the commas and periods. It took me years to figure that out. And the nuns that I had, and Sister Mary St. Leo, if she's dead somewhere and you know where she's at, let me know so I can dig her up to kill her again. But it gave me, and this is where when I look at some of these hard caps and these hard musts, especially on reading, because it got me to hate reading so badly. That this woman would literally torture me with reading out loud. That I don't want that for any kid to have that, especially at third grade, to have that level. Now, my problem was sixth grade, but at third grade, even younger, I don't know that you recover from that. And then the predictor of who's going to jail gets even worse.
Right, but yes, and once again, I think you've hit it really. We need to create an environment where children love to read. And what these laws have done have created an environment that, okay, you're apparently deficient in this. Teachers know that the best way to get a child to become a better reader or literacy is by knowing their strengths and using those strengths then to help them become readers. But another example is, for instance, my son has really got into the Who Would Win books. So we know that that's an interest of his. And so he's going to use what he knows and his interests to really work on reading those. And so we've taken away any kind of curiosity. We've taken away any kind of opportunity for children just to be able to sit and work on understanding. And you hit also another key point, is that you had to figure out how to read, that none didn't do it for you. You figured it out. Had you had an environment where you were allowed to excel in who you were as a reader, you would have been just fine.
Well, the other part of it is we did some remedial things to read out loud because my silent reading comprehension was off the charts. My ability to get it out of my mouth was completely different. And, again, it took some work. And it was one of those things that I was always self-conscious about. And as soon as you started hitting a kid with this, it doesn't get any worse. And look, to her, I don't know that she was a teacher. She was just a woman in a dress with a stick who just loved to beat the boys with the sticks. But that's a whole therapy session for another day.
But I would argue that that's what we are doing to not the proverbial, that we are creating a whole generation of children who aren't wanting to read because we are saying you are a failure, you're deficient. And we've also gotten to the point that it's data-driven. Right. And data-driven in reading instruction means that how fast you can read, how accurate you can read. And I know we listened to Debbie Miller speak about how she had a student that was reading to her, And she says, listen, I was able to read that fluently, and I was able to read every word correctly. And then Debbie asked her, well, what was the book about? Had no clue.
Yeah.
And I think that we lose the idea that, there's very few times that we actually read out loud, so that's a different skill than reading is interacting with text. It's laughing at the funny parts. It's crying when a, character you love, gets hurt or things like that. Reading is about interaction and understanding. It's a active sport. You're
Right,
not a passenger. You're not a sideline.
No, but let me ask you this, because one of the things that I've always believed, and I give my wife the ultimate credit, the utmost credit for what she's done with our kids. We've got probably 1,000 books, kids books, literally littering the house. We've got stacks of them all over the place, and our kids, they're readers, and they read for enjoyment, which as someone who hated to read. Has no idea why they do this, and thank goodness my wife has done this. Ultimately, though, doesn't this come to the home and providing that environment for kids to be able to read for enjoyment instead of like I had to, you got to read this and you got to read it now and on command?
Absolutely. I would agree with that, but I also think that schools can create an environment that supports that. When I was in the classroom, I had over 1,000 books in my class. And kids were able to choose from those books, and then we worked on their skills or what have you that they needed to work on within those books. And that's extremely important. The other big concern I have is that if you know to Defend the Early Years, are you familiar with them?
No.
Okay, so that also is a Nancy Carlson page, and there's a variety of people in there, but they have a really solid research project in there called Reading in Kindergarten. And it shows, they did a study in 2007, which shows that there's a concern about kids when we promote early reading instruction, that there's no solid evidence that the long-term gains for children who are taught to read in, kindergarten versus if they're taught to read in first or second grade. And if anything, that early reading does not indicate high intelligence. In fact, they show that in the research by Dr. Marcy Gudemi, that the class in kindergarten, that only 40% chance of being at the top of the class at the end of third grade. So once again, I think that we're missing a lot, like you had mentioned, all this political strife and such like that. Children in kindergarten need to be playing. They need to be, and it's not just because it's about getting along. Think about if you ever watch children play, there's a lot of thought that goes into it. There's a lot of deep thinking. There's a lot of paying attention to particular things, everything that we need to do to become readers and writers. And so, once again, I would argue that these laws have created such a horrible prescriptive programs because we know that the best way to get children to become better readers is by experienced, qualified teachers, which is really hard to come by when they're forced to use a program. And so I would say, yes, you have to instill that love of reading, but you can do that. I was just talking to a teacher who had taught in kindergarten. She says, we read Brown Bear so many times, and then we made books about it, and children would write about it, and things like that. That's what an environment should look like. Yeah. But instead, these laws that are showing that they're not working.
See, I remember kindergarten, and it's like 100 years ago. Kindergarten was nap time a couple of times. It was a lot of playing, a lot of interacting, and you passed if you could tie your shoes and not wet yourself every day.
Yes, well, hopefully, it could be a little bit more. And I'm all for letting children, read books, and I'm all for if that's where they're at right now. But we've created that sterile environment that Nancy Carlson Page really talks to in the Let the Children Play.
Right.
And I don't know of anyone who can, in that environment, really thrive on reading. And the other concern I have is these tests then determine which route you go, which path you're going to take. And like you said, it's become very factory. They claim that we're all 21st century and blah, 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 and that's so not true. It's not what my children are getting.
Yeah.
And like I said, I refuse these tests for my children, and I'm glad they did, because that label sticks with you. It's very, very hard for you to lose your label if
Absolutely.
You've been labeled too late. And I think we have labeled too many kids as deficient because we are forcing them to read before they are developmentally ready.
There you go. The article, Third Grade Reading Laws Are Harmful, written by Stephanie Rizdal-Fear. We'll get links out on how you can take a look at that and maybe think about how it affects your life. But Stephanie, I appreciate you taking some time. Really
Thank you
good
so
stuff.
Much. All right. Thank you so much. Enjoy your night.
Thank you as well. Again, make sure you take a look at it. We'll get links out on how you can do that. Quick break. Right back. Stick around. You're listening to The Rick Smith Show. or working people. Come to talk.
Saving work in America, one show at a time. The Rick Smith Show.
I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 1912. That was the day mill workers began to walk off the job at the Phoenix and Gilbert knitting mills in Little Falls, New York. The strike was sandwiched between the Bread and Roses strike in Lawrence, Massachusetts, and the 1913 Patterson textile strike. American, Hungarian, Polish, and Italian workers, over 70% of them women, struck against wage reductions. Their hours had just been cut from 60 hours a week to 54, and their wages adjusted accordingly. A recent Factory Inspection Commission investigation revealed deplorable working and living conditions, among the worst in the state. As a result, state legislators passed protective legislation restricting women's work hours. Many social reformers pushed for laws like these in the hopes of improving women's quality of life by minimizing their exploitation on the job. But the reduction in hours spelled disaster for these mill women, who then faced a loss of income that ranged between 75 cents and $2 a week. Socialists in nearby Schenectady, including the socialist mayor George Lunn, arrived in town and were promptly arrested for giving open-air speeches in support of the strikers. IWW organizers soon followed to help organize picketing, daily strike parades, and strike committees for each of the factories. They quickly established IWW Local 801, the National Industrial Union of Textile Workers. By the end of the month, mounted police closed in on the women strikers and began clubbing them, many into unconsciousness. The police raided strike headquarters and arrested IWW strike committee leaders. But the women strikers stood strong and were celebrating victory by the end of the year. They won full reinstatement and 60 hours pay for 54 hours work. Labor History in 2 brought to you by the Illinois Labor History Society and The Rick Smith Show.
Welcome back to The Rick Smith Show. Now, here is Rick Smith.
Yeah, I mean, anytime I talk about reading, it's one of those things that it's kind of like one of those personal things that, you know, in that one nun, man. And she had the, you know, the yardstick, the pointer stick with the little black tip on the end that you'd use on the blackboard, and she could crack you on the back of the neck with that little black thing. You know, I swear she probably won the gold in fencing, you know, 100 years earlier. She was just plain evil, and every day you knew when it came to reading either social studies or history or science, you knew the biggest paragraph. You saw it coming around, and I've talked to people who've gone through this too. You know, you knew when that giant paragraph was coming around, that was yours. You never got the little one with 3 sentences that you could practice before it got to you. You knew that was yours. And look, in her defense, you know, now that I'm a little older, looking back and you know, I've gone through some self therapy. She was probably trying, hey, you know, if you get more practice at it, you're going to eventually get better at it. Instead of going the route that I went, which was to be defiant and do everything I could possibly do to turn my deficiency into a comedy routine, which only ended up getting me beaten more. But, you know, and look, one of those things that ultimately at the end of this long blown story is got me to hating reading. It wasn't until I was in my 30s. And look, I still don't read for pleasure. I read for work. I read for, you know, I read studies. I rarely read something because, I'm gonna read a story. Rarely does that happen. Now my kids, and you know, I blame this on my wife, and in a good way. You know, my kids read Harry Potter, the whole series, and I'm like, you know, I've never read a 700-page book in my life, let alone just for the heck of it. And not to mention, you know, 4 or 5 or 10 of them. I don't know how many Harry Potter books there are, but I've never done that. And I don't think I ever will. Who's got that kind of time? But my kids, they love reading, and I thank my wife for that, because she really, really did an incredible job. Because we know the studies are there. It's clear that kids who read and read well do well. As where if it were me, you said you got to read this by tomorrow, there was no way it was getting done. I was looking for every possible way to get out of it, and it was torture. And I know a lot of people like that. It was that one teacher. It was that one, and look, like I said, she probably was trying. We're going to whip you into shape. The tough love stuff that got me to just absolutely hate it. And that year of 6th grade was just pure misery. Fortunately, she got pregnant, and or I think we're guessing now, because she went off to print Bibles at the mission over Christmas, which I'm told is Catholic for pregnant, and we never saw her again. But and thank goodness, thank goodness. Speaking of the Catholic Church, the Pope today, I'm sure lots of my Catholic friends' heads collectively exploded as Pope Francis, in a documentary that premiered today, has reportedly backed civil unions for same-sex couples. Evidently, it's reported that he said homosexuals have a right to be part of a family. He had the audacity to say they're children of God and have a right to a family. Nobody should be thrown out or made to be miserable because of it. What we have to create is a civil union law. That way they're legally covered. Collective Catholic, American Catholics, the Catholic Church and the rest of the world, a little more sane. Which again is the reason that I tell people I'm a broken Catholic. I grew up in the Catholic Church, where we believed in social justice and peace and helping the community and all of that, while still having all the problems that they had. And now it's this bizarre focus on abortion and gay marriage, and the people that I know who identify as Catholic, that's the world that they're in. And which is why I think some of the shots have come against Amy Coney Barrett, because everyone assumes she's like every one of the Catholics they now know. That's the focus, and I think this is an interesting time for him to come out and say this, because the fear is here in this country, where they're going to roll back healthcare protections, they're going to roll back women's choice, and they're, I believe, most certainly going to roll back some of the same-sex marriage stuff. So going to be an interesting 2021 and beyond, but good on Pope Francis. And as I said, when he was when he became Pope, maybe there's hope. Maybe there's hope. Love to hear your thoughts. You can email me, rick@thericksmithshow.com. I'm going to take a quick break. Right back.
Waving the flag of freedom for people, not corporations. Rick Smith.
In northern Colorado, firefighters scrambling to contain the monster Cameron Peak fire, burning since mid-August. Now the largest wildfire in state history.
Massive Colorado wildfires forced thousands to evacuate. Wind and solar energy, now the cheapest energy in the world. Plus,
the future rests in renewable energy.
Joe Biden talks clean energy and infrastructure jobs at ABC Town Hall.
Did Donald Trump talk about it at the NBC Town Hall?
Nope.
Weird. All of those stories and more straight ahead from BradBlog.com. I'm Brad Friedman.
And I'm Desi Doyen.
Stand by for 6 minutes of independent green news, politics, analysis, and snarky comment.
Let's talk about wildfires, a.k.a. the coronavirus of the forest.
True. They're getting worse, not going away, costing Americans billions, are taking people's lives, and the President of the United States is clueless about them, in denial, and wishes we'd stop talking about it. This is your Green News Report. Okay, Desi Doyen, even though there are more Republican Donald Trump voters in California than any other state in the union, he really hates California.
Yes, he must, because Trump is jerking around with disaster aid for California. First, the Trump administration late last week very publicly rejected California's request for disaster aid from record-breaking wildfires, saying Trump concurred that California didn't deserve it. And then after the completely predictable public outcry, Trump reversed himself.
He does that a lot, doesn't he?
Yep, and Colorado residents may now get to see if Trump plans to jerk them around too. Thousands were forced to evacuate from the new Calwood fire near Boulder that erupted over the weekend, straining firefighting resources already struggling to contain the explosive Cameron Peak fire near Fort Collins. That one has burned since August and has grown to be the largest fire in the state's history.
So 5 of the 6 largest fires in California history have taken place this year here in California, and now the largest fire in Colorado history also this year. But I'm sure it's just a coincidence.
Well, 2020 is one of the worst wildfire seasons ever for both California and Colorado, driven by high winds and extremely dry conditions, especially in Colorado, as October snows have failed to appear. Climate scientists warn that wildfires are now hotter, more intense, and more destructive because of man-made climate change.
Did Donald Trump complain that Colorado doesn't rake their leaves in the forests?
Not yet.
I'm sure he'll get around to it.
New wildfires have also erupted in Utah as well.
Oh, well, he definitely won't complain about them not raking leaves in Utah.
Well, the 2020 fire season has been historic in the U.S. West, with nearly every state battling active wildfires. More than 46,000 fires have burned this year in the United States, scorching more than 8 million acres so far.
And more than 4 million of them have been right here in California.
In Brazil, a heat wave has spread across a large swath of South America, setting multiple records and triggering wildfires in the world's largest tropical wetland. The New York Times reports that roughly a quarter of the vast Pantanal wetlands in Brazil, one of the most biodiverse places on Earth, have burned in wildfires intensified by climate change. Wildfires also leave much more behind than just destroyed forests and homes. A new study warns that rising smoke plumes contain more than just lung-damaging particles, but can also contain cancer-causing chemicals in the smoke that disperse into the air, the soil, water, and even into indoor dust. But they say more research is needed to understand how much and how to mitigate these chemical contaminants. In U.S. politics, at a town hall hosted by ABC News late last week, held after Donald Trump pulled out of a scheduled presidential debate, former Vice President Joe Biden got an opportunity to expand without interruption on his proposals to create jobs in upgrading the nation's infrastructure and transitioning to 100% clean energy.
We're going to put 500,000 charging stations on new highways we're building and old highways we're building. There are well over 100,000 wells that are left uncapped in the region. We could hire 128,000 of these people who are working in the industry to cap these wells and get a good salary doing it now. Put close to 1 million people to work by weatherizing 4 million buildings and 2 million homes.
The NBC News town hall with Donald Trump aired at the same time, but climate policy and jobs did not come up. Climate is a topic in the final presidential debate of 2020 on Thursday, so for the first time in U.S. history, climate change will be a topic of all 3 general election debates.
We'll see. Donald Trump is working the refs, whining about the moderator and the topic, so we'll see if climate change is still in by the time they get there.
Finally, there is some very good news. The infamously cautious and conservative International Energy Agency finally confirms previous research showing that wind and solar power are now the cheapest form of new electricity in nearly all of the world today and will continue to fall in price. The report suggests the transition to clean electricity is unstoppable.
That is good news. For much more on all of these stories and the many we couldn't get to today, check out our website at greennews.bradblog.com. Find, follow, and share us planet-wide on the Facebooks and the Twitters at Green News Report. I'm Brad Friedman.
And I'm Desi Doyen.
And this has been your Green News Report.
Welcome back to the Rick Smith. Welcome back to the Rick Smith Show. Now, here is Rick Smith.
So now the reality of, we've got Donald Trump evidently paying taxes in China, just not here in the U.S. And as we just talked about, massive amounts of wealth being concentrated in the hands of the very few at the very top. And now we're talking about, closing down universities here in Pennsylvania. It's crazy to me. And again, you hear about all of this stuff, all of this concentration of wealth for the very fortunate. But for the rest of us, nary a crumb. I'm here to share some thoughts on and I love the way the news media put this, on this, this integration plan of how they're going to combine 6 universities and make them 2. It's an integration plan. It's not that we're shutting 4 universities down and limiting the opportunity for people. No, we're going to integrate them. I love those business words. But anyway, here to share some thoughts on the integration plan is Dr. Jamie Martin. Dr. Martin is the president of APSCUF, the Association of Pennsylvania State College and University Faculties. Jamie, thanks for taking time for us.
Hi, Rick. Thanks for having me back. I appreciate it.
So let's start with that word that I've got a problem with. It's an integration plan. We're moving forward. We're doing away with redundancies. We're using synergy. I hate business words.
Well, it's interesting because we're talking about integration plans. Sometimes they're talking about mergers in some news outlets when they're reporting this. And the fact of the matter is, we don't know what the plan is yet. As we're seeing press releases from presidents at the 6 universities coming out saying we're going to be integrating. The chancellor was before the House Appropriations and Budget Education Committee on Monday, and today before the same 2 committees in the Senate. And they were asking him lots of questions, and the answer is, I don't know yet. So the only thing they've done thus far is a financial analysis to see if it makes fiscal sense to do some plan, but there's no meat on the bones yet. And so some of these proclamations about what's going to happen or what it's going to look like are very premature.
Right. So I'm glad you said that it's premature because, when I read the story, my mind started to go, okay, you're going to close down Bloomsburg, you're going to close down Lock Haven, you're going to close down Mansfield, and you're going to create one university. So 2 of them are going to be by the wayside. You're going to close down either California, Clarion, and Edinboro and create one there. To me, what's going to happen to all of those other communities? What's going to happen for the ability of people to be able to work and go to those universities? There's so many questions because these institutions have been there for as long as I can remember and are part of the community. To shut them down, I think, is a horrible idea.
Absolutely. Excuse me. Absolutely. And actually, the chancellor, he doesn't possess the ability to close a university. That resides with the legislature. So the closure can't happen. But you're right. So many questions with what would an integration look like, from the questions you're asking, what could happen to the local communities in the areas where these universities are located? What about athletics? What would that look like across some kind of integration of 3 universities into one? What about our student athletes who might be on scholarship? How could that negatively impact them? The kinds of programs that could be available. So we've been asking questions like, if at Bloomsburg you have a nursing program, does that mean that students who want to take nursing at one of those 3 universities have to go to the Bloomsburg site? Would they have to commute among 3 universities to put their entire program together? There are so many questions that need to be answered, and I'm very hopeful, as are all of my colleagues at these 6 universities, that the chancellor's going to hold to his word and be transparent in this process, to engage stakeholders like students and faculty and staff and alumni, business owners. There are way more questions than there are clear answers at this point. Right. So we'll see moving forward what the plan actually looks like.
So sadly, then, the 1,000 questions that I have about this, nobody has an answer for at this moment. But ultimately, we know it comes down to dollars and cents. We haven't invested enough money in these institutions. We haven't, they're not operating, and the virus has a lot to do with this as well, I assume. And we also have a federal government that hasn't helped the states and the local governments to be able to fund things like higher education. So a lot of this stuff is Hunger Games, isn't it?
It is. And I've talked about that in the past. We can talk about COVID, and it certainly has played a role, but this has been a long-standing problem with the state system of higher education. The lack of appropriate appropriations from the state legislature. We've talked, we're anywhere from 47th to 50th in funding for public higher ed in the United States. We're not among good company in that regard. Our students are graduating with the highest levels of student debt perhaps in the country. And I hate to say this, but the people who get blamed are the faculty. And in listening to the House and Senate hearings over the last couple of days, you hear kind of that same narrative. Your universities cost too much. You need to get a handle on the cost. And I'm thinking, you haven't funded these universities for decades. And so it's this disconnect between they're angry that costs are going up, but don't see the responsibility that they have. And they've been making these moral decisions with their budgeting and not funding the public universities the way that they should have been for years.
Yeah, but this again is another one of those consequences of the tax cut fetish that one of the political parties has. And taking no tax pledges and running on, we didn't raise your taxes. Well, you did. You raised my local property taxes, my local city taxes, your education cost. You've raised the cost of everything else. You just haven't raised the state taxes. But I'm still paying for it, and this is the consequence of it. Now at a time when we need education the most, now at a time when we're moving into a massive change in what our economy is going to look like, from one of somewhat labor to much more AI, much more technical skill. You're closing down institutions of higher learning when we should be expanding them, expanding high school to at least include an associate's degree and beyond. It just seems really short-sighted to me.
Well, you're right, and all of this has been short-sighted. You might remember back to when Governor Corbett was there and did the massive cuts to the state system about 19%. And I recall him talking about, I wasn't going to raise taxes. And I remember thinking to myself, you just raised taxes on middle-class families. Those who had students that were hoping to go on to one of our universities, you just raised their taxes pretty significantly by increasing tuition. And so this disinvestment in education generally, whether it's K through 12 or higher ed, has long-lasting impacts. And so it's short-sighted. You're right. Obviously, the impacts are long-term and long-lasting for a lot of families and a lot of students.
No, I'm glad you brought that up, because I remember you guys had put together a really great rally against those cuts. And I remember I was standing waiting for my turn to speak, and there was a kid standing behind me, and we were just kind of talking back and forth while I was waiting. And he told me his story. He said, look, if these cuts go through, I might not be able to finish my education. And he said, I'll be the first one in my family to be able to finish my education. And I really want to do that. And he said, my grandfather wanted to go to college, but never had the chance because, he got married, the war happened, and, he went to the factory to work, and spend his career in the factory. And my father wanted to go, and kind of the same story, but he didn't get to finish. He went back to the factory. And the kid hit me with a line that still sticks with me. He goes, I don't have a factory to go back to. This is my only shot. And this is when we talk about higher education, especially with the state system. I remember that kid because, like you said, this for some is the only shot they're going to get.
Absolutely. And, again, the lack of funding does not allow us to actually meet our mission. The mission of the state system was to provide a high quality, affordable education, often for students like the young man you talked to, individuals that might come from working families, blue-collar families, lower middle-income families, middle-income families. And we've gotten to the point where we've lost our cost advantage, if you will. And so we're beginning to lock out those opportunities for big swaths of the kids in our Commonwealth. And it's really tragic.
Right.
I mean, for them not to have that opportunity because of the cost going up, and again, what you'll hear is costs go up because of the faculty. The cost goes up because there's been a lack of investment, and those are moral choices that are being made.
To hit on your point, one of your predecessors that we used to have on all the time, Dr. Hicks, said back, when I was of college age, because my wife had graduated from one of the state system, she graduated from Millersville. And, she tells, they went through, they paid the tuition. She was able to go through and wasn't saddled with a lifetime of debt. And it was affordable. He told the story that, back then when we were going to school, when our age group was college age, the state, so between, state and local, between everything, about 75% of that was picked up by the taxpayer. The student paid about, I think it was like 25% or something in those numbers. Now it's completely the opposite. To where, the state's not picking up hardly anything, and it's all falling on the backs of the students. And I remember that because I don't remember tuitions being this high when I was going to school.
No. And Dr. Hicks is exactly right. It's still true today. And, we started out talking about integration, but we've got another train running down a parallel track. That's happening at 7 of our universities, where there's a possibility of retrenchment of faculty. It started out at 10, we're now down to 7, but this is looking very like it's going to be very real, and probably somewhere in the neighborhood of potentially 300 faculty members being fired through no fault of their own, not because of disciplinary issues, not because of not doing their job, but because universities, under the order of the chancellors, have to reach financial sustainability in the next 2 years. But it's going to lead to massive layoffs. And, the people that are left out of this whole conversation is going to be, what's the impact of losing that number of faculty at these 7 universities? What's the impact on the students?
Right.
Whenever programs no longer exist, they're in their sophomore year and all of a sudden their major disappears. So we're dealing with both the integration, what does that look like, and now the threat of retrenchment at half of our universities.
It sounds to me like, and look, I know there's a wing of a certain political party in this state that would love nothing more than to sell off the state system and privatize the whole bit of it, and obviously take whatever money they could do when they liquidate it and dish it out to their wealthy friends. But it sounds to me like this is one of those mission accomplished moments, because it doesn't sound like we're moving the state system in any direction where we're going to create an environment that we working class people are going to be able to have an opportunity when we need the skills. Because look, I do see, the tech revolution being very disruptive, and a lot of people my age having to go back to school and get another set of skills. I do see, people having to go back, often. And if you're closing these universities down, if you're getting rid of the minds, if you're going to have this massive brain drain, it just seems like we're really, really setting ourselves up for failure.
Oh, and I agree with you wholeheartedly. Decimating programs and decimating universities has a huge impact on our students, and losing that number of faculty jobs, not to mention, our brothers and sisters in AFSCME and other units where they're going to be seeing the same kinds of furloughs. If you just want to take a really, kind of utilitarian perspective, what's going to be if you just want to look at the economic impact on a community, if that's what you need to look at to see this is a bad idea for some individuals in some political parties. But, decimating universities, getting rid of programs, and making it hard for our students to attend any one of these universities has just been so disheartening for me over the last number of years, and especially just in the last 6 or 8 months, seeing what's happening and the attacks that are going on is again really, really distressing and disheartening for me.
Because I come back to it's not that people don't want to go to these universities. It's not that you don't have students. It's not that people don't need an education. It's that they're not funding it. So to me, the simple solution here is we need politicians in Harrisburg who are going to fund it. We need people in Washington, D.C. who are going to help out states and local governments to be able to fill their budget gaps, especially during this crisis. So that they can fund these things. And we need to prioritize education because, look, at the end of the day, I don't want my kids to have to go off somewhere else to college. I don't want them to have to go to another state or halfway across the state to get an education if they don't want to. It just seems like this is a lot of bad. So what can we do? What can we, the taxpayers, what can we citizens do to say this is wrong? We're not going to take it.
Well, I think, we can continue to put that message out there and make sure people are aware of the bottom line issues. And I think the other thing we can all do here in the near term is vote. To let our vote be our voice in terms of where we think our country should be going and where we think the state should be going, because that's something that we can all exercise no matter who you vote for. I think making sure your voice is heard through that vote. I think that's something we can certainly do here in the near term.
Yeah. So, in this plan that we began talking about, the idea of shutting down, these 6 universities and creating 2, I guess the other question I have, would this be 2 centralized universities, or would they still utilize the 3 campuses? Have they talked about how that would look?
No, and this is I guess at one level frustrating for all of us, because we want these answers, and in part because the president's office press release is saying this is happening. To be fair to the chancellor, Act 50 did lay out a process by which they had to follow, and the first was the financial analysis. What was announced at last week's Board of Governors meeting was that there's going to be the president from Clarion out in the Western trio and the president from Bloomsburg in the Northeastern trio, who will be heading up different kinds of a task force, if you will, different kinds of committees. And I'm hoping, as I said, they'll engage all the stakeholders and seek input from people. But what he talks about is one president for each of the integrated universities, one faculty, one curriculum array. And there are lots of things that would have to be people that have to be consulted and constituencies that would have to be heard before any of those plans go forward. And the proposal is the plan will go forward to the April Board of Governors meeting. So there's a lot of ground to cover between October and April.
I guess the last question I've got, how likely is something like this to happen? I mean, this is a major disruption. I mean, this is a major change of the state system of higher education, which I think is the jewel of higher education in the country that we have here in Pennsylvania. Any chance? Is there a real chance that this could happen?
Yeah, I absolutely think this could happen. On the one hand, it could be that the plan looks like, hey, this would be a great idea. It's going to grow enrollment. Each of the campuses will maintain their identity. They'll each keep their own, campus footprint, and have classes at each of their universities that are available to all students. That could be one idea. The other idea, where they're truly merging the 3, and students are going to have to select, I really want to go to Bloomsburg, but they don't have the program of study I want to have there, or commuting between 3 universities in the middle of winter. I mean, we could imagine all kinds of things that could be either good or really bad.
Yeah.
And that's what I guess I'll keep thinking to myself, devil's in the details. We'd have to see what the details are.
Yep.
And then determine if that would be a good process or and a good outcome or not so much.
Yeah, I don't see a good outcome out of this plan. But like you said, devil's in the details. I'm sure you'll come back and share more details as they become available with us.
Absolutely.
Hey, Dr. Martin, I appreciate you taking some time for us and sharing what's going on. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Rick. Have a good evening.
You as well. Our good friend, Dr. Jamie Martin. Make sure you check out the website, apscuf.org. She's the president of APSCUF, the Association of Pennsylvania State College and University faculty. He's going to take a quick break. Love to hear your thoughts. You can email me, rick@thericksmithshow.com. Quick break, right back after this. I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 2001. That was the day that Thomas Morris Jr. died from breathing in anthrax. A week earlier, he had been exposed to the deadly poison when an envelope containing the powdery substance was opened at the mail distribution center where he worked. Thomas Morris was a member of the American Postal Workers Union. His union brother, Joseph Cursine, died 2 days later. Both men worked at the U.S. Postal Service Brentwood Processing and Distribution Center in Washington, D.C. The poisoned letters were addressed to Senators Tom Daschle and Patrick Leahy. More postal workers at a distribution center in New Jersey also fell ill from exposure to anthrax-poisoned mail. In total, 22 people were sickened by anthrax that fall from letters addressed to politicians and news outlets. In addition to those injured, 5 people died, including a 7-month-old infant who was visiting NBC News in New York City with his mother who worked there. Coming the month after the September 11th attacks, the anthrax poisoning sent another wave of fear of terrorism throughout the United States. The Brentwood Distribution Center was closed down for decontamination until December 2003. When it reopened, the facility was renamed for the 2 fallen postal workers. The next year, Senator Joe Lieberman gave an address to the APWU. He said, quote, "The postal workers who were exposed to anthrax and still got the mail out and kept our system running. They are proud union members. I know I'll never forget that, and America won't forget that. All of you at the APWU deserve our respect and our support." One person suspected of the poisonings committed suicide, and the case was closed. No one was ever convicted of the crimes. For more information, go to laborhistoryin2.com, like us on Facebook, follow us on Twitter at laborhistoryin2.
Welcome back to the Rick Smith Show. Now, here is Rick Smith.
I cannot wait for Election Day. I can't wait. There's actually a possibility, and it hasn't been the possibility the 15 plus years that I've lived where I'm at now that a Democrat could actually be my congressman. And I've got a guy who's my congressman right now who I don't agree with on anything, and cannot wait to see him beaten and sent down the road. Right now, Representative Scott Perry, and polling looks good that the guy with the long name, Eugene DePasquale, that is actually a Republican attack. Don't vote for the guy with the long name. But my representative, Scott Perry, along with a couple of others, signed a letter. They're upset. They're angry. And this is just one of those really, really incredible moments. But you know how Joe Biden's going around the country on Amtrak, the Amtrak, the Build Back Better Express tour, as they're calling it, that's gone through Pennsylvania and Ohio. Well, evidently these handful of nitwit representatives, one of them being mine, and not surprising, the other one being just down the road with his name Lloyd Smucker. Our 2 illustrious representatives are angry, and they want answers to how it is that Joe Biden can use Amtrak. They want to know how much he's paying to charter the Amtrak train, and if there's any disruptions. They want answers. It got me thinking of the whole, you can't handle the truth. Truth of the matter is, you can charter a train, which is what Joe Biden did, and paid Amtrak, who needs money, since Congress, you, Scott Perry, won't fund it. But I love the fact that they're focused on Joe Biden and his chartering, actually paying for the Amtrak train, while you've got Donald Trump using the South Lawn of the White House for his super spreader campaign events. It just, well, can't wait for Election Day. Anyway, if you missed any of today's program, thericksmithshow.com. That's where you go to get the podcast. The Rick Smith Show app on the smartphone. Take the program on the go, wherever you go. And as always, you can email me, Rick at thericksmithshow.com. Thanks so much for being here. We'll see you back here next time.
You've been listening to The Rick Smith Show. Email Rick at rick@thericksmithshow.com. Until next time, this has been The Rick Smith Show, where working people come to talk.